Hi friends, and welcome to my little mini backyard homestead garden. Today's video I'm going to share with you all of the mistakes that I made for this year's garden in hopes that it'll help you guys learn from my mistakes and maybe you can do something different next year, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to share some of my fails, some of the things I did wrong, some of the things that just didn't do so well, some of the changes I'm going to make for next year, and also some of the things that did really well. So I hope this video is helpful for you, so go ahead and give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. And I do have to say, my garden did pretty well. It is ginormous here, at least as big as we can get it in this yard. I love my garden so much. I love working in it, but there's just some things that didn't go so well. And I was just really getting sad and discouraged and just really being hard on myself because I've been gardening for like over 10 years. And you would think by now I would have the perfect garden. I would know everything. I would have everything down and just everything flourish and just do so well. And I just couldn't understand why after so many years I still don't have it down. And then I got to realize, I took a step back and I looked at my whole gardening history and I realized that since 2006, I've gardened off and on those first couple years, but then pretty consistent the last several years. I have gardened in 3 different states. 3 completely different zones, 3 completely different areas, and in each of those states, I gardened in multiple places. So for a total of 8 different gardens. I've done container gardening, community gardening, backyard gardening in different areas, and every year that I change my garden, I have to relearn everything. So if I had this garden space and was gardening consistently in it every year for 10 years, then yes, I'd probably know everything. I'd have a beautiful, flourishing garden, but I don't because I keep having to relearn that every single year. And so it's kind of discouraging, but in a way kind of refreshing because I know it's nothing that like I've done. I mean, maybe I should be a better gardener and be able to adapt easier. But even in this backyard, we've been gardening here for 3 garden summers, 3 seasons, 3 summers, 3 years, and we've expanded each year. And so this is the year that we've had the biggest garden. And so now I can take what we have, what I know, and kind of work with what we've got. And hopefully we'll be able to have a better garden in the future. The other thing that I had going for me this year was the weather. Now that is something that we cannot control, and it doesn't really matter how inexperienced you are or how experienced you are, the weather is going to affect you unless you're like a super rich gardener and can have a giant greenhouse that's climate controlled and all that stuff. Then obviously you can work with the weather, but for the rest of us who don't have that, it's going to vary each year, and that's just something that we have to just step back and say, well, this was not a good year for weather, so that's why my garden didn't do so well. We started out with a very, very cold spring. Our last frost date is usually the end of April, beginning of May. Usually by the 2nd week of May, we can get stuff in the ground, and it's just great. This year, it wasn't until almost the end of May that I got stuff in the ground, and even then, I still had to come out here at night and cover my plants because we had a warning of frost several times. So we had a very, very cold spring, and then it just boom went straight into hot weather. It is the 2nd week in September and we are just now getting cooler temperatures. Up until just this past weekend, we have been having consistent temperatures in the upper 90s, even low 100s, and that I can't even comprehend that heat. It just has been so awful. It's been so awful for the garden, and that is one of the main reasons why the garden has been suffering and not doing so well. I've talked to other gardeners in the area. Their tomato plants are suffering like mine are. Their gardens are suffering, and so the weather is just one of those things where sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, and this year it was really bad and it affected the garden. So let's talk about the biggest fail that I had this year, and that was not labeling my plants. When I planted them in the ground, I thought I would remember where I put everything. That's the biggest lie you can tell yourself as a gardener, is you will remember where you plant stuff. No, you won't. That's how I ended up with 7 zucchini plants and 3 cucumber plants instead of 2 pickles and 2 cucumbers. Because I didn't label, I didn't really have good germination because of the weather. I didn't remember where I planted what, and I just was like, well, I hope I didn't already plant zucchini, and then we ended up with 7 plants. So make sure that you label. I love writing on little popsicle sticks and just sticking them in the ground, so that way you know where you have everything. But other than that, my other biggest fail for plant-wise was my green beans. Now, my green beans this year, it happened 2 years ago. This year, I finally figured out what I think it is, and I think my green bean plants had mosaic disease. This is from a diseased seed that you don't know it's diseased until it comes up, and then the leaves start crinkling, and they eventually die. Now, everything that I've read, you can still eat the beans. They're fine to eat, but it does spread through the plants, and you don't want to save your seeds. You don't want to leave your plants in the ground because they could leave diseased residue that'll affect next year's crop. So next year I'm not going to plant my green beans in the same spot, but I planted over 100 green bean plants. Last year I canned over 50 quarts. This year I only canned 16. So we definitely did not see the yield in green beans, and I planted about the same as I did last year. So we did not get as many green beans. I sadly had to pull up all the green bean plants because one of the things of mosaic disease is you have a lower yield and you have small stunned growth plants, and it just eventually spreads to the plants that are not diseased. I did get my green bean plants or my seeds from 2 different places, Botanical Interests, which I also did that last year, and they were fine last year. But this year my purple beans were the ones that were diseased, and it started in the front of the garden, and you can just see it slowly move towards the back. My other seed place that I got from was from M.I. Gardener. Those ones I just got the Blue Lake bush beans. Those ones were beautiful, but they were quickly affected by all of the other beans. So I think next year I'm just going to stick with the Blue Lake bush beans from M.I. Gardener because I was really happy with that. I'm not going to do the purple beans. They look cool. They're just beautiful. But when you cook them up, they're green anyways. And I think the Blue Lake bush beans are just slightly better than the purple beans, although the purple beans are fun. So I think next year that's going to be a change. I'm also not going to plant in the same spot. I'm going to do it in a different spot so that way my seeds don't get diseased again. I had hopes on leaving the green beans in the ground until they died when they were done producing, and then running the mower over it and leaving those roots in the ground, because nitrogen is stored in the roots, and once the plant dies at the end of the season, it releases that nitrogen into the ground. So I was hoping to be able to just leave that all in there, but because they're diseased, I had to pull them all out and I couldn't leave them in the ground, and I was so upset about that, but that's okay. We'll try again for next year. Another thing that I did wrong is planting stuff in the wrong spot. So my sunflowers, you can't see them there, but they're so tall. They shaded out my cantaloupe. Last year I had a beautiful crop of cantaloupe. I planted one plant and I had like probably between 15 and 20 cantaloupes. This year I planted 2 plants and I've got 3 cantaloupe. Actually 4, I picked one a couple weeks ago and it was fine. My one plant is a little bit more in the sun. That one's got 3 good ones. The rest of them, they just started to grow and then they just kind of stopped growing. So make sure that you're not shading out plants, planting stuff in the right spot. We do have another area in the garden that gets a little bit more afternoon shade. So next year I'm going to be planting like my cabbage and lettuce there that can tolerate a little bit more shade. I'm not going to plant my sunflowers in the garden. They do well pretty much anywhere. So I'm going to plant them closer to the chickens to give them some shade, and just not in the garden because they got, the tallest one was just under 10 feet tall. And so I have a whole row of it, or half a row of it, and they just shaded out my plants. Also, we had kind of had a little bit of issue of powdery mildew on my cantaloupe plants, and so that's kind of also the reason why they didn't do well, but mostly because I didn't plant stuff in the right spot, keeping in mind the shade. The next area that was kind of a fail that I was hoping to learn from my mistake last year was my tomato bush. I have quite a few tomato plants in there. As you can see, it is just jam-packed and crowded. I have to crawl around on the ground, dig through, climb in there to find all the ripe tomatoes. Same thing happened last year. This year, I pruned them a little bit more and I staked them up, which I thought I liked until they started getting too big. So next year, I'm gonna actually space them out through the garden, and I'm not going to plant them all in one clump so that way they're not all like clumped together. I'm also, instead of just growing a ton of tomato plants, I'm gonna be more intentional about growing Romas and the San Marzano, I think is what they are. They're more the sauce tomatoes because I like to make tomato sauce. I would like to do barbecue sauce, ketchup, all those that are a little bit thicker. I did it last year with spaghetti sauce with our tomatoes, but it just, they're so watery and juicy. It takes a long time to simmer down. So I think I'm gonna plant a few, like our pear tomatoes did so well. The crimson tomatoes were absolutely delicious, as well as our gold medal tomatoes. So I might plant one of each of those next year and then do like a whole row of Romas and then spread out some space and then a whole row of the other sauce making tomatoes, because that's really where my focus is, because I want to preserve garden harvest that we can use throughout the year, ways that I can save money in buying spaghetti, not buying spaghetti sauce, not buying ketchup, not buying other stuff that we normally use that I can harvest from our garden. Now with salsa, I make tons of salsa, and that one can pretty much take any kind of tomato, and so I love making lots of salsa, but I also want to be more intentional about making some other tomato products so we can save money in that way. And so with that way, I'm going to just kind of space them out a little bit more in the garden, give me a little bit more room so that way I can easily harvest them. Kind of along the same lines of tomatoes as tomatillos. Our tomatillos did absolutely amazing. I only planted 3 plants. I didn't think I was going to get any because my transplants actually broke before I got them in the ground. So I just sprinkled some seeds in the ground and they actually came up, and I have canned over 15 pints of green salsa, and let me tell you, it is delicious. I don't know if I'm gonna plant it next year because it's one of those things where I got so much this year, I don't know if I need to plant it for next year. So that'll actually save me a little bit more room, but it was really fun to grow those tomatillos. And let me tell you, green salsa is amazing. So that was one of the positive things that did really well in the garden. Another thing that did not do so well this year was lettuce. Normally we have an abundance of lettuce, red leaf, green leaf, different salad mixes, and romaine, and it just does so well, and we just don't even have to buy lettuce almost the whole entire summer. This year I had a really hard time getting lettuce to grow, I think because it was just so hot. Once I finally did, because it was so hot, it wasn't bitter, but it was just a very strong, almost bitter flavor. I didn't mind it in salads. My husband didn't mind it. The kids were kind of, they did eat it like in taco salad and stuff when it was mixed with other things, but it was one of those things where it was just, well, this wasn't the best year for lettuce. I did go ahead and plant a fall crop, hoping that maybe this cooler weather will allow for better lettuce. I don't know, we'll see. But that was just one of the things that you can't control weather-wise. It was a bad year for lettuce. Another disappointing thing this year was our carrots. Our carrots are doing beautifully. However, I planted 2 different varieties, the Atomic Red and another orange one. I can't remember the name of it, but they don't taste very good. And I have like 2 whole rows of carrots and they don't taste very good. And then I got to reading on the package that the carrot flavor sweetens after they're cooked. So I'm going to pull out all the carrots and I'm going to, I think, blanch them and then freeze them, and then we'll just roast them and use them in soups throughout the year instead of eating them fresh. Last year I just bought from Botanical Interests at our local feed store. It was just a tricolor carrot mix, and the purple carrots were so good. And just, I was like, oh, it'd be so good, I'll just buy the individual colors, because I don't think I could find the whole colored package. And so I planted those and they don't taste good. They're kind of bitter and they're just not very good. So it's kind of disappointing. So we're not gonna really have a big carrot harvest to eat fresh. But again, my kids love the roasted carrots and they'll be fine for soups. It's just kind of disappointing because I love eating carrots and hummus. So just be mindful of the different varieties that you plant. You know, there's so many different varieties of vegetables, and so make sure you read that package, because if I had read that, I would have been like, oh, this probably is not what I want to eat for fresh eating. So that was kind of disappointing, but hopefully we'll stock up our freezer. And I have canned carrots before. I'm never doing it again. They come out way too mushy. Even in soups, the kids didn't even like them. So maybe if you like canning carrots, maybe that would be a thing, but I'm not going to can the carrots. My cabbage did not do well this year. It started out beautiful, but then it completely rotted from the root. I think it was in the wrong spot and it got too much water. And I was so excited. I was like, oh, this is looking so beautiful. And then they started turning brown. And when I pulled them out, they were rotted into the root. It smelled awful. So we lost all of our cabbage. So next year I'm going to plant it in a different spot that's not so much water. Well, we're going to kind of redo our water system, which I wanted to do a video of it. But once the plant started growing, it covered it all up and you couldn't really see it. And we're gonna tweak it a little bit. So maybe next spring I'll show you kind of what we have for watering. But it was in a spot that got a little too much water, and I'm thinking that's probably why. But I'm gonna try cabbage again next year. Along with the brassica family, I did plant some Brussels sprouts, and those started out beautifully. And then they just got covered and covered and covered in aphids, like beyond like repair. So we've been just chopping them up and feeding them to the chickens, and they just love the leaves. They love pecking the aphids off of them. So I don't know if I'm going to do the Brussels sprouts next year, just because they take up a lot of space, and then with the risk of aphids, and plus they're not ready until like after frost. So they would still have like another month or 2 to go. So I feel like it's kind of just, I don't know, it takes up a lot of space and it takes a long time. So I'm not sure. I haven't decided if I'm going to do that again next year or not, but I am next year going to plant marigolds around some of my other problem plants that have a little bit of an aphid problem, like the kale. That way it can deter it away. I didn't learn that until when I found all our aphids on the Brussels sprouts. I was like, what do I do? And then I realized, oh, I could have planted marigolds. So next year I'm going to plant some flowers in between plants and hopefully kind of deter them away. So if I do choose to do the Brussels sprouts again, then yes, I will definitely plant more marigolds around that. So yeah, I don't know what to do about aphids. I tried the whole washing them off, that didn't work, so we just are letting the chickens enjoy that for now. So let's talk about some of the success of our garden this year. Tomatillos I already talked about, that was just super exciting. And then the other thing is cilantro. I did succession planting because normally cilantro, especially when it gets hot, it just bolts and then turns into coriander. And my tomatoes have just been taking so long to ripen that the cilantro would bolt. So I've been planting a little bit of cilantro, and a little while later I'll plant some more, and then I'll plant some more, and I haven't had any go to seed, and we've been able to use it all up. So I have another batch growing right now in hopes that that will be ready for when my tomatoes are ready, and then I can make some fresh salsa with that cilantro. One of the most exciting things that I had this year was garlic. I planted it last fall. I wasn't sure how it was going to go, but it was so easy, and I harvested it this year, and we've been eating through it. I've been trying to save it so I can plant it this fall, but it's so good, and I've been using it in our pickles and just everything, and I'm just like, I gotta save it for growing, but yeah, it's so good to eat. So if you've never tried garlic, then you need to give garlic a try, because it is literally so easy to plant. It's something you plant in the fall, you forget about it during winter until it's time to harvest it in the middle of summer. So I'm really excited to do garlic again this year. I'm gonna buy some more garlic seeds, or well, garlic bulbs that are seed garlic, known as seed garlic. And I'm gonna plant so much more garlic so we can have more to eat. Speaking of pickles, we used it in our pickles. I forgot to mention in one of the fails, because of the weather being so hot, our cucumbers turned really bitter. So all of the pickles I made all throughout the summer are bitter. So I don't know if every jar is that way. I did open up one to find out, and it was really disappointing. But anyways, that's another one of those things. You just can't control the weather, and we ended up with bitter pickles. But the garlic was good. Because I planted 7 zucchini plants, we had so much zucchini. I was able to give some away. The chickens were even getting tired of it. My freezer's full of zucchini, and man, you know how much zucchini produce. Times 7 plants. Now I'm left with just 1 plant because most of the squash bugs got all of our zucchini, but I'm not too sad about that because we still have 1 plant here that's still producing pretty good. I'm kind of getting tired of zucchini, so I'll probably be pulling it pretty soon. But that was another success this year, because last year the squash bugs completely demolished our plant and I didn't get any zucchini last year. Our sunflowers were huge this year, way bigger than last year, because I had them in a different spot that got a little bit more sun. They shaded out my other plants, but they did really well, and I'm super excited to harvest those sunflower seeds for the chickens. So my strawberries up there did not do well last year. They had an iron deficiency, and the leaves kind of turned this bright, like yellowish green, and I was like, what's wrong? So I did some research and I found out that they needed iron. So last year I started the weekly iron treatments. It's just a spray iron thing that you can either spray on the leaves or water it with them, and I started doing that and they started recovering. We didn't get a lot of strawberries last year, but this year, as soon as they came out of dormancy, I immediately began weekly treatments of the iron. They didn't struggle at all this year. We had a beautiful harvest of of strawberries. And I was super excited that I was able to figure out that problem. So if you have a problem with strawberries, or even last year our bean plants showed a little bit of iron deficiency, and I sprayed that on there and it really helped. So that iron can really help if you're struggling with strawberries or any other plants that are showing that iron deficiency. So one thing I learned this year that I never learned about before is the no-till gardening method. We're trying to implement that now. We had always tilled before, and even before then we'd always had a different garden and we've had to till or do other things. But now that we're working on this garden here, how it is, we're going to be able to implement that method and really build that good soil. So I'm really excited about this no-till method, bringing in all this nice compost. So I'm really excited about that and just learning more about that process. If you haven't looked into it, make sure you do, because it is so fascinating, and it can really change your garden game. Overall, the garden did really good, just not as good as I had hoped. There were just those few little things like the beans and a few other things that just did not do well that we lost, and it's kind of disappointing. But if you step back and look at the overall picture of how well our garden did, it did amazing. And that is why I'm so grateful that we live in a modern day where we can go to the store and we can buy the food that did not grow well in our garden. I could not imagine what it would be like living way back then and having your garden fail, and then you're like, okay, now what do we do? Now what do we eat? We can just go to the store and pick up those things that failed us in our garden. So that is everything about my garden. I am already planning my garden for next year, trying to figure out what I'm gonna do differently, what I'm gonna grow. I'm already making a list of the seeds that I'm gonna get, and I seriously cannot wait for next year's garden season. Well, this one isn't even over yet. I'm still enjoying my garden, but I can't wait for next garden season. So leave me a comment down below. Let me know what garden fails or successes that you had. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed already, make sure you do. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.